I was lying in a hospital bed with a fractured skull, broken ribs, and a ruptured spleen when the text message came through. My phone buzzed on the sterile white table beside me, and with trembling hands still bruised from the IV lines, I managed to grab it. The pain in my chest screamed with every breath, but nothing could have prepared me for the pain those words would inflict. Mom, finally, 5 days after the accident that nearly killed me. 5 days of staring at the door, hoping, praying they would walk through. The message read, "Glad you're okay. Can't make it to the hospital. Serafina needs help shopping for her big New York trip. You remember, right? Priority. Get well soon." That smiley face. That goddamn smiley face felt like a knife twisting in my already broken body. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, please hit that like button and subscribe. Your support means everything, and I promise this story gets even more intense. Drop a comment telling me if you've ever been the forgotten child. Now let me take you back to where it all began. The Vance family looked perfect from the outside. My father, Richard Vance, was a respected business consultant who had built his firm from nothing over 25 years. My mother, Vivian, ran a boutique clothing store in the upscale part of town, frequented by wealthy clients who appreciated her eye for luxury brands. They lived in a beautiful colonial-style home with white columns and a meticulously maintained garden. They drove matching Mercedes. They attended charity galas and country club events. They were the picture of success. And then there were their daughters. Serafina, 3 years younger than me, was everything they wanted in a child. Beautiful in that effortless way that seems to defy logic, she had inherited my mother's high cheekbones and my father's striking blue eyes. She was artistic, creative, charismatic in a way that drew people to her like moths to a flame. From the time she was young, it was clear she was special. At least, that's what everyone always said. I was Eleanor, the first child, the one who arrived before they were ready, before my father's business had taken off, before my mother had established her shop. I came into the world during their struggling years, and somehow, I always felt like I carried that burden with me. I wasn't ugly, but I wasn't striking. I wasn't unintelligent, but I wasn't brilliant. I was painfully, irrevocably average, in a family that valued exceptionalism above all else. Growing up, I learned quickly what my role was. I was the responsible one, the one who made straight A's without fanfare because that was expected, the one who came home on time, finished her homework before dinner, helped with chores without being asked. I was the daughter who didn't cause problems, didn't demand attention, didn't make waves. And in return for this good behavior, I received the bare minimum of acknowledgement. Serafina, on the other hand, could do no wrong even when she did everything wrong. She failed classes and my parents hired tutors, blamed the teachers, switched schools. She crashed my mother's car at 16 and they bought her a new one within a week. She ran up credit card bills buying art supplies and designer clothes, and they increased her limit. Every mistake was framed as a learning experience, every failure as a stepping stone to greatness. I remember the exact moment I realized the disparity was intentional. I was 14 years old, sitting at the dinner table, when I mentioned that I had been selected as one of only 3 freshmen to join the varsity debate team. It was a huge accomplishment. I had worked for months, practicing arguments in my room until my voice was hoarse, studying cases and building evidence files that covered my bedroom floor. My father glanced up from his plate. "That's nice, Eleanor," he said, then immediately turned to Serafina. "Did you finish that painting you were working on? I told the Hendersons about your talent and they want to commission a piece for their lake house." Serafina was 11. She had been painting for approximately 3 months, and somehow, her hobby warranted more enthusiasm than my academic achievement. My mother didn't even look at me. She was too busy gushing about how wonderful it was that Serafina had such natural talent, how she was going to be famous one day, how they should really look into private art lessons with that instructor from New York who charged $500 an hour. I excused myself from the table and went to my room. Nobody noticed I was gone until 2 hours later when my mother knocked on my door to ask if I had seen her phone charger. That became the pattern. I achieved, they acknowledged briefly and moved on. Serafina breathed. They celebrated like she had won the Nobel Prize. I learned to stop expecting anything different. I learned to bury my accomplishments in my chest and carry them alone. I learned that love in the Vance household was not distributed equally, and no amount of trying would change that fundamental truth. High school was a masterclass in invisibility. I graduated 3rd in my class with a full academic scholarship to a state university. Serafina barely graduated at all, having spent most of her senior year traveling to art shows and galleries with my parents, missing weeks of school at a time. My graduation ceremony lasted 2 hours. My parents arrived 15 minutes late, sat in the back, and left immediately after to help Serafina pack for a summer art intensive in California that cost $30,000. College was supposed to be my escape, but it turned into another lesson in self-sufficiency. The scholarship covered tuition, but everything else was on me. Books, housing, food, transportation. I worked at a campus bookstore 20 hours a week and picked up catering shifts on weekends. I ate ramen and rice more nights than I can count. I wore the same 3 outfits in rotation for an entire semester because I couldn't afford anything else. Meanwhile, my parents were funding Serafina's entire existence at Parsons School of Design in Manhattan. Tuition paid in full, rent on a studio apartment in Soho, a monthly allowance that was more than I made in 3 months of work. When I asked my father if they could help with my textbooks, he told me it would be good for me to learn financial responsibility. Financial responsibility. As if I had any other choice. I called home once a week, every Sunday at 6 p.m., because my mother had once mentioned that was a good time. The conversations were always the same. My mother would ask how school was going in that distracted tone that indicated she was doing something else while we talked. I would give brief updates. She would say that was nice. Then she would launch into a 20-minute monologue about Serafina's latest achievement, her new friends, her gallery showings, her social life. I would listen, offer appropriate responses, and eventually we would say goodbye. She never asked about my job, never asked if I needed anything, never asked if I was okay. My father barely spoke to me at all unless it was to offer unsolicited advice about my major, suggesting I switch from nonprofit management to something more practical, more lucrative. He didn't understand why I wanted to work for organizations that helped people. Where was the money in that? Where was the prestige? Why couldn't I be more ambitious, more like him? I didn't tell him that I chose nonprofit work because I understood what it felt like to need help and not receive it. I didn't tell him that I wanted to build something that actually mattered to people who were struggling. I didn't tell him anything, because he wouldn't have understood, and he definitely wouldn't have cared. The summer before my senior year, something shifted. I had secured an internship with a well-respected national nonprofit organization. It was competitive, prestigious, exactly the kind of opportunity that should have made my parents proud. I called to tell them the news, genuinely excited for the first time in years. My mother answered. I could hear the sounds of a party in the background, music and laughter and clinking glasses. "Mom, I got the internship," I said, unable to keep the enthusiasm from my voice. "The one with the National Coalition for Homeless Youth. They only take 5 interns nationally and I got selected. It's in DC for the summer and they're providing housing and a stipend, and this could really open doors for me after graduation." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," she said, and I could hear her moving, the sounds of the party getting quieter. She was walking away so she could hear me better, and for a moment, I felt seen. "Hold on 1 second. I heard muffled voices, my mother speaking to someone else. Then she came back on the line. "Eleanor, I'm so sorry, but I have to go. We're hosting a celebration for Serafina. She got accepted to a residency program in Paris, fully funded. She's going to be living there for 6 months starting in the fall. It's incredibly competitive. Only 10 artists worldwide were selected. Can you believe it? Our daughter is going to Paris." Our daughter. Singular. "Can I call you back later?" she asked, but she was already hanging up before I could answer. I sat in my apartment, staring at my phone, and something inside me cracked. Not broke, not yet, but cracked. Enough that light started seeping through, illuminating truths I had been trying to ignore for years. They were never going to be proud of me. They were never going to celebrate my achievements. They were never going to choose me, prioritize me, see me as anything more than the responsible, low-maintenance daughter who didn't require their attention. I was a support character in the story of Serafina's exceptional life. That was when I met Jackson Reed. It was a random Tuesday in late July, the kind of hot, humid day where the air feels thick enough to chew. I was working the evening shift at a coffee shop near my apartment, my second job that summer, trying to save money for the fall semester. The nonprofit internship had been incredible, but the stipend barely covered food and transportation. I needed every extra dollar I could scrape together. Jackson walked in at 7 p.m., right when the dinner rush was dying down. He was tall, with dark hair that fell into his eyes and the kind of genuine smile that was becoming rare in my experience. He ordered a black coffee and a blueberry scone, paid with exact change, and left a $5 tip in the jar. He came back the next day. Same time. same order, same generous tip. On the third day, he introduced himself. "I'm Jackson," he said, extending his hand across the counter. "I feel like I should know the name of the person who makes my coffee every day." "Eleanor," I said, shaking his hand. His grip was warm and steady. "Eleanor," he repeated, like he was testing how it felt in his mouth. "That's a beautiful name. Classic." He asked about my day. Actually asked, and actually listened to the answer. We talked for 15 minutes about nothing important while I wiped down counters and refilled napkin dispensers. He told me he was a software engineer working remotely for a tech company in Seattle. He had moved to the area 6 months ago because he liked the pace of a smaller city, the ability to actually have a life outside of work. He came back every day after that. Our conversations got longer, deeper. He asked about my internship, my goals, my plans after graduation. He remembered details I mentioned in passing. He made me laugh, which was something I realized I hadn't done genuinely in months. 3 weeks after we met, he asked me out. We were closing the shop, I was counting the register, and he was sitting at a corner table pretending to work on his laptop but really just watching me. "Eleanor," he said, and there was something nervous in his voice that I hadn't heard before. "Would you want to get dinner with me sometime? Like an actual dinner, not coffee shop food, at an actual restaurant where neither of us is working?" I looked at him, this man who had shown me more genuine interest in 3 weeks than my parents had shown me in 3 years, and I said yes. Our first date was at a small Italian restaurant downtown. Nothing fancy, but he pulled out my chair and asked me real questions and listened to my answers like they mattered. He told me about his family, parents who were still married after 35 years, 2 younger sisters he clearly adored, a childhood that sounded warm and chaotic and full of love. I told him about my family too, though I tried to keep it light. Mentioned my parents' businesses, Serafina's art career, the general facts without the painful details. But Jackson was observant. He noticed the way my voice changed when I talked about them, the way I deflected, made excuses, tried to reframe their neglect as just being busy. "Do you see them often?" he asked carefully. "Not really," I admitted. "They're usually pretty focused on Serafina's career. She needs a lot of support." "And you don't?" The question was so simple, so direct, that I didn't have a prepared answer. "I'm more independent," I finally said. "Independent or just used to not asking for help because you know you won't get it?" I stared at him across the table, this person I had known for less than a month, and felt tears prick my eyes. Nobody had ever called it what it was before. Nobody had ever looked past my carefully constructed explanations and seen the truth underneath. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "That was too much. I barely know you and I'm making assumptions." "No," I said, my voice rough. "You're right. You're absolutely right." That was the beginning of us. Jackson became the person I told things to. The person who noticed when I was tired or stressed or pretending to be okay. He started picking me up after my shifts, bringing me food he cooked himself because he knew I was living on poverty meals to save money. He helped me study for my senior year exams, making flashcards and quizzing me while we sat in his apartment with takeout containers scattered around us. He was there when my parents forgot my birthday that year. I didn't mention it, didn't make a big deal of it, but somehow, he knew. He showed up at my door at 7 a.m. with a homemade cake, slightly lopsided and overfrosted, with 23 candles jammed into the top. "Happy birthday, Eleanor," he said, grinning. "I'm not a baker, as you can see, but I figured you deserved cake from someone who remembered." I cried, actually sobbed while sitting on my apartment floor, this sweet, imperfect cake in front of me, and Jackson held me without asking for an explanation. Later, he asked, "They forgot?" I nodded, unable to speak. "Their loss," he said simply. "You're the most incredible person I know." Senior year was both the best and worst year of my life. Best because of Jackson, because of the relationship we were building, the future we started carefully planning together. Worst because the contrast between the love he showed me and the indifference my family demonstrated became impossible to ignore. Thanksgiving that year was particularly brutal. I went home for the holiday, taking a bus 5 hours because I couldn't afford a plane ticket and my parents hadn't offered to help with transportation. Jackson had invited me to spend the holiday with his family, but I felt obligated to see mine. It had been months since I had been home. I arrived Wednesday evening. My mother opened the door, hugged me briefly, and immediately launched into a story about Serafina's latest commission. My father was in his study, on a phone call that apparently couldn't be interrupted. My room had been converted into a home gym. We weren't sure when you'd be able to make it home," my mother explained, gesturing to the treadmill and weight bench that now occupied the space where my bed used to be. "You're always so busy with school and work. We put an air mattress in the guest room for you." The guest room was really a storage room. Boxes of my mother's inventory from the boutique were stacked along the walls. The air mattress was wedged between a rack of designer handbags and a pile of shoeboxes. There was barely room to walk. Serafina arrived home around 10 p.m., breezing in with 3 suitcases and a friend she had met in Paris. My parents rushed to greet her, taking her bags, asking about her flight, insisting she must be exhausted and needed to eat something immediately. We all sat in the kitchen while my mother heated up leftovers. Serafina talked about Paris, her residency, the artists she had met, the galleries interested in her work. My parents hung on every word, asking questions, laughing at her stories, taking pictures to post on social media. I sat at the end of the counter, invisible. Around midnight, Serafina finally acknowledged me. "Oh, Eleanor, you're here. When did you get in?" "5 hours ago," I said. "Cool, how's school?" "Fine." "Great." And then she was back to talking about herself. Thanksgiving dinner was more of the same. 20 people gathered around a table that could comfortably seat 12, and somehow I ended up in the kitchen eating standing up because there wasn't enough room. I helped my mother prepare food all morning, but when it was time to eat, all the seats at the main table were taken. My father suggested I grab a plate and find a spot wherever I could. I watched through the doorway as my parents toasted Serafina, celebrating her success, her talent, her bright future. Multiple people gave speeches about how proud they were of her. My father's eyes actually teared up when he talked about his brilliant youngest daughter. Nobody mentioned me. Nobody toasted my impending graduation, my internship, my acceptance into a graduate program with partial funding that I had worked myself to exhaustion to achieve. I might as well have not existed. I left on Friday morning, catching an early bus back to school. I didn't say goodbye. Nobody noticed I was gone until Sunday evening when my mother sent me a text. "Did you leave already? You should have said goodbye." I didn't respond. Jackson picked me up from the bus station. He took one look at my face and pulled me into a hug that lasted several minutes. "That bad?" he asked. "Worse," I said. We went to his apartment. He made me tea and wrapped me in blankets and let me talk. I told him everything. About the air mattress in the storage room. About eating alone in the kitchen. About being invisible at my own family's Thanksgiving dinner. About feeling like I was slowly disappearing. Like maybe if I stopped trying altogether, nobody would even notice. "I notice," Jackson said fiercely. "I see you, Eleanor. I see how hard you work, how much you care, how incredibly strong you are to keep going despite them. I see you, and you're extraordinary." He asked me to move in with him after graduation. Said he didn't want me to ever feel invisible again. That he wanted to build a life where I was the center of everything that mattered. I said yes. Graduation came in May. I earned my bachelor's degree with honors, had already been accepted into a master's program in nonprofit management, had secured a teaching assistantship that would cover tuition and provide a modest stipend. I had done it all myself, with no help, no support, no encouragement from the people who were supposed to be proud of me. My parents came to graduation. They arrived late, missed me walking across the stage, and left early because Serafina had a gallery opening that evening they couldn't miss. They stayed for maybe 40 minutes total. Took 2 photos with me, both of which they never posted online. My mother complained about the heat and the crowds. My father took 3 work calls during the ceremony. Jackson's parents drove 8 hours to be there. His mother brought flowers. His father took 100 photos. His sisters made a ridiculous poster with my name in glitter. They cheered so loudly when my name was called that the dean paused and smiled. Afterwards, they took me to dinner at the nicest restaurant in town and insisted on paying. They toasted my accomplishments, asked about my plans, told me how proud they were of me. They weren't my family, but they treated me better than my family ever had. That summer, I moved in with Jackson. We found a small apartment downtown. Nothing fancy, but it was ours. He worked from home most days, and I started my first year of graduate school. We built routines together. Morning coffee on the tiny balcony, cooking dinner together while discussing our days, weekend hikes and lazy Sunday mornings, and all the small, ordinary moments that made up a life. For the first time, I felt like I belonged somewhere, like I mattered to someone, like I was seen and valued and loved not for what I could do or achieve, but simply for existing. My parents called occasionally, always asking for favors. Could I help them understand some new tax software? Could I look over some contracts? Could I come home for a weekend to help them reorganize their storage unit? They never asked how I was doing, how school was going, whether I needed anything. The calls were transactional, and I was starting to resent them. Serafina called too, usually in crisis. She had a fight with a friend, or a gallery had fallen through, or she needed advice about something she could have easily Googled. I helped because that's what I had always done. I fixed problems. I provided support. I made myself useful, so maybe, somehow, I would become valuable enough to keep. Jackson watched these dynamics play out with increasing frustration. He would listen to me on the phone with my mother, hear how one-sided the conversations were, see my face fall when I hung up. He never said anything directly, but I could see the anger simmering beneath his careful neutrality. "Why do you keep doing this?" he asked one night after I had spent 2 hours on the phone helping my father troubleshoot his computer remotely. "They're my family," I said, the same excuse I always gave. "Family shows up," Jackson said quietly. "Family reciprocates. Family doesn't just take and take and take until there's nothing left." "They're busy," I started, but he cut me off. "No, Eleanor, they're selfish. There's a difference between busy and not caring. They've shown you over and over again that you're not a priority. You're not even on their radar unless they need something. When are you going to stop setting yourself on fire to keep them warm?" I didn't have an answer for that, because he was right, and I knew it. But admitting it meant facing a truth that was too painful to accept. It meant acknowledging that my parents didn't love me the way I needed them to, maybe didn't love me at all. That conversation stayed with me. I started noticing things I had trained myself to overlook. The way my parents only called when they wanted something. The way Serafina's name dominated every family conversation. The way I was expected to help them, support them, show up for them, while receiving nothing in return. I started setting small boundaries. I stopped answering every call immediately. I started saying no to requests that were inconvenient or purely for their benefit. I stopped initiating contact and waited to see how long it would take them to reach out. It took 6 weeks. 6 weeks of silence before my mother called, irritated that I hadn't been responding to her messages about helping organize Serafina's upcoming art show. "We needed your help with this, Eleanor," she said. "Serafina is counting on you." "I've been busy with school and work," I said, which was true but not the real reason I hadn't responded. "We're all busy," my mother snapped. "But family helps family. Don't be selfish." Selfish. The word hit me like a slap. I had given them everything for 26 years. My time, my energy, my emotional bandwidth. I had shrunk myself to fit their narrative, prioritized their needs over my own, sacrificed my own well-being to support theirs. And I was selfish for finally setting one boundary. "I'll see what I can do," I said, and hung up before she could respond. I didn't help with the art show. I let the messages pile up unanswered. I focused on my own life, my own goals, my relationship with Jackson. And slowly, I started to feel lighter, less burdened. Less like I was carrying the weight of their expectations on my shoulders. But the real breaking point came on a random Tuesday in October. It was late afternoon. I was in the library studying for midterms when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Is this Eleanor Vance?" "Yes, who's this?" "This is Officer Martinez with the County Police Department. I'm calling to inform you that you were listed as an emergency contact for your parents, Richard and Vivian Vance." My heart stopped. "What happened? Are they okay?" "There's been an incident at their home. They're both fine, but we need someone to come down to the station. There are some questions about financial irregularities we've uncovered, and we need to verify some information." Financial irregularities. My mind raced. I don't understand. What kind of irregularities? "It would be better if we discussed this in person, Miss Vance. Can you come down to the station?" I drove there in a daze, called Jackson on the way to tell him what was happening. He insisted on meeting me there. At the station, Officer Martinez led me to a small conference room. My parents were already there, sitting next to a lawyer I didn't recognize, both looking strangely calm for people who had apparently been involved in some kind of incident. My mother saw me and immediately stood up. "Eleanor, thank God. We need you to explain to these officers that this is all a misunderstanding." "Explain what?" I looked between them and the officers, completely lost. That's when Officer Martinez laid out a series of documents. Bank statements, tax returns, business records. All showing a complex web of financial transactions that looked, even to my untrained eye, highly suspicious. My father had been using Serafina's name and social security number to open multiple business accounts, funneling money through them to avoid taxes. significant amounts of money. The kind of money that turned this from a civil issue into a criminal investigation. My mother's boutique was even worse. She had been operating what amounted to a designer goods laundering operation. Buying items from questionable sources, often stolen or counterfeit, selling them as authentic through her store and various online platforms, not reporting the income, and using Serafina's identity for many of the transactions. We're trying to establish whether Serafina was aware of these activities, Officer Martinez explained. Your parents claim she had no knowledge, that they were managing these accounts on her behalf as a way to help fund her career. Where is Serafina? I asked. Paris, my mother said quickly. We don't want to worry her with this. It's just a misunderstanding. This isn't a misunderstanding, Mrs. Vance, Officer Martinez said firmly. This is identity theft, tax fraud, and potentially money laundering. These are federal crimes. I sat there, processing what I was hearing. My parents had been using my sister to commit crimes, had been doing it for years. Had built their lavish lifestyle not just on hard work but on fraud and theft and illegal activity. And they had called me, listed me as an emergency contact, expecting me to what? Help them? Cover for them? Provide some kind of alibi or explanation? I don't know anything about this, I said clearly. I haven't been involved in their finances or business operations. I can't help you. My mother's face went pale. Eleanor, don't be ridiculous. You're good with paperwork. You can help us explain. Explain what? That you've been committing crimes using Serafina's identity? That you've been lying to the IRS for years? I can't explain that, Mom, because I don't understand it. Don't talk to us like that, my father snapped. We're your parents. You owe us respect. Respect? The word came out sharper than I intended. You want to talk about respect? You've ignored me for 26 years. You've made it clear that the only daughter who matters is Serafina. And now, when you're in trouble, when you need someone to bail you out, suddenly I'm relevant? Suddenly I'm the daughter you remember exists? This is hardly the time, my mother hissed. Actually, I said, standing up, this is exactly the time. I'm done. I'm done being the backup daughter. The emergency contact you only call when you need something. I'm done with all of it. I looked at Officer Martinez. I've told you everything I know, which is nothing. If you need anything else from me, contact me through my own lawyer. I didn't have a lawyer, but I would get one if necessary. I walked out of that police station with Jackson beside me, and for the first time in my life, I felt something other than guilt about setting a boundary with my parents. I felt relief. The accident happened 3 weeks later. I was driving home from campus, exhausted from a long day of classes and teaching assistant work. It was raining, the kind of steady downpour that made visibility difficult. I was at a red light, waiting to turn, when I saw the headlights in my rearview mirror. They were weaving, moving too fast, and I had just enough time to realize the driver wasn't going to stop before the impact threw my entire world into chaos. The sound was apocalyptic. Metal crunching, glass shattering, my own screen cut off as my head slammed into the window. The airbag deployed, hitting me in the face hard enough to fracture my nose. My ribs cracked against the seatbelt. Everything spun and then went dark. I learned later that the other driver was drunk, had been at a bar since noon, and had run the red light going 60 miles per hour. His blood alcohol content was 3 times the legal limit. He walked away with minor injuries. I nearly died. The paramedics told Jackson they weren't sure I would survive the transport to the hospital. My skull had fractured in 2 places. 3 ribs had broken, 1 puncturing my lung. My spleen had ruptured and was bleeding internally. I needed emergency surgery immediately. I don't remember any of this. I don't remember the ambulance or the emergency room or Jackson's face when they told him I might not make it through the night. I woke up 3 days later in the ICU, tubes and wires connecting me to machines that beeped in a steady rhythm. The pain was indescribable. Every breath felt like knives in my chest. My head pounded with a die intensity that made me nauseous. I couldn't move without agony shooting through my entire body. The first thing I asked the nurse was whether my parents had come. She looked uncomfortable, adjusting my IV unnecessarily, and said they had been notified. They had said they were very busy but would try to make it. Try to make it. I had nearly died, was still not out of danger, and they would try to make it. Jackson was there within an hour of my waking. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, his clothes rumpled, his face gaunt with worry. When he saw my eyes open, he burst into tears, holding my hand so carefully, like I might break. I thought I lost you, he whispered. They said you might not wake up. I've been here every day, every night, just waiting for you to open your eyes. He told me everything. How he had been contacted by the hospital, how he had raced there to find me in surgery, how the doctors had prepared him for the worst. How he had called my parents immediately, left multiple voicemails, sent text messages explaining the severity of the situation. They never called back, never came to the hospital, never sent flowers or even a text to check if I had survived. Day 4 in the ICU, I was stable enough to be moved to a regular room. The doctor said I was lucky, that my injuries could have been so much worse. I didn't feel lucky. I felt like I had been shattered and was being held together by staples and hope. I kept checking my phone, even though it hurt to lift my arm. Kept waiting for a message, a call, any indication that my parents cared whether I lived or died. On day 5, the message came. The one I mentioned at the beginning of this story. The one about Serafina's shopping trip being more important than their daughter's life. I read it 3 times, each time feeling something inside me fundamentally shift. This wasn't just neglect anymore. This was a choice. A clear, explicit choice that shopping was more valuable than me. That even in a life-or-death situation, I still didn't matter enough to prioritize. Jackson read the message over my shoulder. I watched his face darken, watched his jaw clench with fury. He took the phone gently from my shaking hands and set it face down. "You don't need to look at that anymore," he said, but I had already seen it. Already understood what it meant. I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not their daughter anymore. Maybe I never was." That night, alone in my hospital room, I went through my parents' social media. Made myself look at every post, every photo, every comment from the previous month. There were dozens of posts about Serafina, her art, her opportunities, her life, pictures of them helping her shop for her New York trip, videos of them toasting with champagne. Captions about being proud parents, blessed parents, thankful for their amazing daughter. Singular, daughter, not daughters. Not one post mentioned me. Not one hinted that anything might be wrong, that they might have any concern beyond Serafina's wardrobe. While I was fighting for my life, they were shopping. While I was having emergency surgery, they were taking Instagram photos. While Jackson was sitting in a waiting room praying I would survive, they were celebrating having such an amazing daughter. I wasn't forgotten. I was erased. Something in me broke that night. Or maybe it finally healed. I'm still not sure which. But I made a decision. If they were going to treat me like I didn't exist, I would make sure they understood exactly what that meant. Not by begging for their attention, not by trying harder to earn their love, but by showing them what they had lost by never valuing what they had. I spent the next week in the hospital watching, learning, observing. Jackson brought me my laptop, and during the long hours when pain kept me from sleeping, I started digging deeper into what I had discovered at the police station. The financial irregularities, the fraudulent accounts, the web of deception my parents had built. What I found was worse than I imagined. My father's consulting business was legitimate on the surface, but underneath, he had created an elaborate tax evasion scheme. He would bill clients through his main company, then funnel portions of that income through shell corporations registered in Serafina's name. The money would move through several accounts before landing back in his possession, untaxed and unreported. Over the course of 8 years, he had hidden nearly $2 million from the IRS. My mother's operation was equally sophisticated. Her boutique was a front for what amounted to organized retail fraud. She had connections with several individuals who acquired designer goods through questionable means, stolen merchandise, items that fell off trucks, pieces from overseas manufacturers that produced convincing counterfeits. She would purchase these items for pennies on the dollar, then sell them through her store and various online platforms as authentic, marking them up by thousands of %. None of this income was properly reported. None of the sales tax was remitted to the state, and many of the transactions ran through LLCs registered under Serafina's name and social security number. Serafina, living her glamorous life in Paris, had no idea her identity was being used to commit federal crimes. My parents had opened bank accounts, credit cards, business registrations, all in her name. They signed her signature, used her information, created an entire shadow financial identity for their youngest daughter, while showering her with gifts and opportunities purchased with illegal money. The police investigation had stalled because my parents' lawyer was good, and because proving intent was difficult. They could claim Serafina was involved, that she had authorized the use of her information. They could muddy the waters enough that criminal charges might not stick. The investigation was ongoing, but it was moving slowly. I realized something as I read through document after document, following digital trails and cross-referencing transactions. The police had only found the tip of the iceberg. They were looking at recent activity, the last couple of years. They didn't have the full scope of what my parents had been doing, but I could find it. I could document it. I could build a case so comprehensive, so detailed, that there would be no way to escape consequences. Jackson saw what I was doing during one of his visits. I didn't hide the laptop screen fast enough, and he saw the spreadsheets, the bank records, the notes I had been compiling. He sat down slowly in the chair beside my bed. "Ellie," he said carefully, "what are you doing?" "Research," I said. "Research that looks like building a case against your parents." I met his eyes. They used Serafina. Used her identity, her trust, her naivety. She has no idea that if this all comes out, she could be implicated in federal crimes. She could lose her visa, her residency, her entire career. And they don't care. They're willing to let her take the fall if it means protecting themselves. "So you're protecting her?" "I'm protecting the truth," I said. "They built their lives on fraud. They threw money at Serafina to keep her dependent and oblivious while they used her as a shield for their crimes. They ignored me because I was too aware, too likely to ask questions. This isn't about revenge. This is about making sure the truth comes out." Jackson was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his bag and pulled out his laptop. "Tell me what you need." What I needed was access to information that was difficult to obtain legally: financial records, transaction histories, business registrations that were filed in different states under various names. Jackson's technical skills, his understanding of networks and databases, his ability to navigate digital systems, became invaluable. We worked carefully, methodically. Everything we accessed was theoretically public record, just buried under layers of bureaucracy and paperwork. We weren't hacking or breaking laws. We were just incredibly thorough in our research. Over the next 2 weeks, as I recovered enough to be discharged from the hospital, we built a comprehensive file. Every questionable transaction, every shell company, every instance of unreported income. Every time my parents had used Serafina's identity without her knowledge or consent, we documented it all, organized it chronologically, cross-referenced it with tax returns and business filings. The picture that emerged was damning. This wasn't accidental. This wasn't a few mistakes. This was systematic, intentional fraud spanning nearly a decade. The amounts were staggering. Between unreported income, unpaid taxes, and fraudulent business practices, my parents had illegally obtained and hidden millions of dollars. Jackson took me home to our apartment when I was finally discharged. I could barely walk, needed help with everything, spent most of my time in pain even with the medication. He took a leave of absence from work, told his boss it was a family emergency, and dedicated himself to taking care of me. He cooked every meal, helped me shower, brought me books, and kept me company during the long, painful days of recovery. He slept on the couch for the first week because I needed the entire bed to position pillows around my broken body. He changed my bandages, reminded me to take medication, held my hand when the pain was so bad I cried. And he never once complained, never once made me feel like a burden, never once suggested I was asking too much. This, I realized, was what love looked like. Not grand gestures or expensive gifts, not social media posts or public declarations, but quiet, steady presence. Someone choosing to be there, day after day, in the mundane and difficult moments. My parents called once during this time, not to check on me, to ask if I could look over some paperwork related to the investigation. My mother's voice on the phone was irritated, put out that I wasn't responding quickly enough to help them. I told her I was still recovering from nearly dying. She said that was why they had waited a week to call, to give me time to rest. As if a week was sufficient time to recover from a fractured skull and ruptured organs. She asked when I would be well enough to help. I told her I didn't know. She sighed, like I was being deliberately difficult, and hung up. That was the last direct conversation I had with either of my parents for months. 3 weeks after I came home from the hospital, I received a certified letter from a law office I didn't recognize. Inside was a notice informing me that I had been named as a beneficiary in the will of Evelyn Shaw. Mrs. Shaw. I remembered her as a friend of my grandmother, an elegant older woman who had always treated me with kindness at the few family functions she attended. I didn't know she had passed away, didn't know she had been sick. My parents had never mentioned it, which made sense given they never told me anything that didn't directly benefit them. The letter requested my presence at the lawyer's office to discuss the bequest. I was curious but also wary. In my experience, nothing came without strings attached. Jackson drove me to the appointment. The law office was in an old building downtown, the kind with hardwood floors and walls lined with legal books. The lawyer, Mr. Harrison, was in his 60s with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor. "Miss Vance," he said, shaking my hand carefully when he noticed I was moving stiffly. "Thank you for coming. I'm sorry for your loss." "I didn't know Mrs. Shaw had passed," I admitted. "We weren't close." "She spoke of you often," Mr. Harrison said, which surprised me. "She followed your life through your grandmother, and after your grandmother passed, she kept track of you in her own ways. She was quite impressed with your accomplishments." He pulled out a folder of documents. "Mrs. Shaw left you her cabin property. It's located about 3 hours north of here, in the mountains. Small place, 2 bedrooms, completely paid off. She inherited it from her husband and spent her summers there for 40 years. I stared at the documents, not quite processing what he was saying. "She was very specific in her will about why she wanted you to have it," Mr. Harrison continued. He pulled out a handwritten letter, Mrs. Shaw's elegant script covering the page. "She wrote this about 6 months before she passed. With your permission, I'll read the relevant section." I nodded, unable to speak. Mr. Harrison adjusted his glasses and read, "I leave my cabin to Eleanor Vance, the granddaughter of my dear friend Margaret. Eleanor is the only member of her family with any real integrity, any genuine character. I've watched her family overlook her, undervalue her, take her for granted for years. Margaret and I discussed it often, how painful it was to watch. Eleanor deserves a place that is hers alone, a refuge from people who have never appreciated what they have. I hope this cabin brings her the peace she has always deserved but never received from those who should have loved her most." The words hit me like a physical blow. Mrs. Shaw had seen it, had known, had watched my family's dynamics and recognized the truth I had spent years trying to pretend didn't hurt. "She knew," I whispered. "She knew, Mr. Harrison confirmed gently. "And she wanted you to have a fresh start, a place where you could build something that was entirely yours." The tears came then, silent and overwhelming. Jackson's hand found mine, squeezing gently. Mr. Harrison gave me time to compose myself, then walked me through the paperwork. The cabin was mine, free and clear. No mortgage, no liens, no strings attached. The property taxes were minimal. Mrs. Shaw had even left a small sum of money to cover the first year's expenses and any immediate repairs. "She thought of everything," I said. "She was a thorough woman," Mr. Harrison agreed. "She wanted to make sure you had what you needed to make this work." We left the law office with a key to a cabin I had never seen, and a gift from a woman who had seen my worth when my own parents couldn't. That night, lying in bed beside Jackson, I told him I wanted to leave. Wanted to sell everything we owned, pack up our lives, and start over in that cabin in the mountains. Away from my family, away from the investigation and the drama and the pain of being invisible to people who were supposed to love me. "What about your master's program?" Jackson asked. "I can finish online. Most programs offer that option now. I just need to talk to my advisor." "What about money? We'd need income." "You can work remotely. You always have. And I can do freelance consulting, grant writing, work for nonprofits from anywhere. We don't need much, just enough." He was quiet, thinking. Then he said, "When do we leave?" "You'd really do this? Leave everything behind, move to a cabin in the middle of nowhere, all because I need to escape?" "Eleanor," he said, turning to face me in the darkness, "I would follow you anywhere. You've spent your entire life protecting everyone else, sacrificing for everyone else, making yourself smaller so other people could feel bigger. It's time someone protected you. Let me be that person. Let me stand beside you while you build a life that's actually yours." We started planning the next day. I contacted my graduate advisor, who was understanding and helped me arrange to complete my degree requirements remotely. Jackson talked to his boss, negotiated a fully remote arrangement with the understanding he would come back to the office quarterly for important meetings. We listed my furniture for sale, arranged to break our lease early, started packing the things that mattered into boxes. Before we left, I did one final thing. I compiled all the evidence I had gathered, organized it into a comprehensive report with every transaction documented, every law broken clearly outlined, every instance of fraud meticulously detailed. I included a separate document explaining Serafina's unknowing involvement, with evidence that she had been in Paris or at various art residencies during most of the transactions. that she couldn't have been actively participating in the fraud. I made copies, sent one to the IRS with a detailed cover letter explaining what they were looking at, sent another to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. A third went to the State Tax Authority, a fourth to the Business Licensing Board, and one final copy went to Serafina herself, to her address in Paris, with a letter explaining what our parents had done, how they had used her, and how she needed to contact a lawyer immediately to protect herself. I didn't sign any of the reports with my name. I submitted them anonymously, using encrypted email and proxy servers that Jackson helped me set up. I didn't want credit. I didn't want confrontation. I just wanted the truth to be known and justice to be served. Then Jackson and I loaded everything we owned into his car and drove north. The cabin was even better than I imagined. Nestled in a grove of pine trees with a view of mountains that made my chest ache, it was small and rustic and absolutely perfect. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that was barely more than a stove and sink, and a living room with a stone fireplace that dominated one wall. The porch wrapped around the front and side, with a wooden bench that looked out over the valley below. It needed work. The roof leaked in one corner. The bathroom plumbing was temperamental. The heating system was ancient and inefficient, but it was mine. Truly, completely mine. The first thing I had ever owned that wasn't tied to debt or obligation or someone else's expectations. We spent the first month making it livable. Jackson learned basic carpentry from YouTube videos and fixed the roof. I painted every wall, covering years of neglect with fresh color. We installed new fixtures, updated the electrical where we could afford it, made the space functional and comfortable. It was hard work, physical labor that my still healing body struggled with. But it was also therapeutic. Every nail I hammered, every wall I painted, every improvement we made, felt like building something real, something that mattered, something that was mine. The mountain town nearest the cabin was small, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and newcomers were regarded with friendly curiosity. We introduced ourselves as a couple looking for a quieter life, and people accepted that without needing more explanation. The local grocery store owner, Mrs. Chen, took a liking to us and would often slip extra vegetables into our bags, refusing payment. The hardware store manager, Tom, gave Jackson tips on repairs and loaned us tools. For the first time in my life, I felt part of a community. Not because of what I could do for them, not because I was useful or helpful or necessary, just because I existed, and that was enough. My body healed slowly. The fractures mended, the pain lessened. I went from barely being able to walk to hiking the trails around the cabin. Jackson and I would spend hours exploring, discovering hidden waterfalls and perfect picnic spots and vistas that took my breath away. I started sleeping through the night without nightmares. Started eating without my stomach churning with anxiety. Started feeling like myself, or maybe like the person I was always supposed to be before my family's neglect had twisted me into something small and desperate for approval. 3 months after we moved, the first news reports started appearing. Local business owners face federal charges in elaborate tax fraud scheme. The article detailed my parents' operation, the hidden accounts, the unreported income, the fraudulent business practices. The amounts involved were staggering enough that it made regional news. I read the article once, feeling nothing. No satisfaction, no guilt, no anger, just a strange sense of completion. Jackson watched me carefully. "You okay?" "I think so," I said. "Is that wrong? Should I feel something?" "You feel whatever you feel," he said. "There's no right way to react when your parents are facing federal charges." More articles followed. Daughter cleared of involvement in parents' fraud case. That one detailed how Serafina had been in Europe during most of the fraudulent activity, how investigators had determined she was an unwitting victim of identity theft, how charges against her had been dropped. She had hired an excellent lawyer, apparently, and had cooperated fully with the investigation. My mother's boutique was shut down, assets seized. My father's consulting business collapsed when clients discovered the investigation. Their house went into foreclosure. Their cars were repossessed. The life they had built on fraud and lies crumbled systematically. 4 months in, my mother called. I had changed my number, but she somehow got the new one, probably from my graduate school's directory. "Eleanor," she said when I made the mistake of answering. "We need to talk." "No," I said simply. "Don't be childish. This is serious. We're facing criminal charges. We could go to prison. The lawyers are costing us everything. We've lost the house. We have nothing left. And you're calling me because? Because you're our daughter. Because family helps family in times of crisis." The audacity was breathtaking. Like you helped me when I was in the hospital? Like you helped me through college? Like you helped me at any point in my entire life? We always provided for you, she protested. You provided the legal minimum required to not be charged with neglect. That's not the same thing as being a parent. We don't have time for this, Eleanor. We need help. Financial help. The lawyers require a retainer we can't afford. We thought maybe you could take out a loan, or ask your boyfriend's family, or something. I actually laughed. You want me to go into debt to pay for lawyers to defend you against charges of financial crimes you actually committed? You don't understand how complicated this is. I understand perfectly. You broke the law for years. You used Serafina's identity to commit fraud. You built your comfortable lives on illegal money. Now you're facing consequences, and you want me to save you. Eleanor, please. Her voice cracked. We're desperate. Good, I said. Maybe now you know how I felt every time I needed you, and you weren't there. Every time I hoped you'd show up and you chose Serafina instead. Every time I wanted to matter to you and realized I never would. That's not fair. We loved you both equally. Don't lie to me, not now. You loved Serafina. I was the inconvenient daughter you tolerated because you had to. And now that she's in Paris, refusing to speak to you because she finally figured out what you really are, I'm your backup plan. The daughter you ignored for 26 years suddenly becomes valuable when you need something. We're your parents. You owe us respect. I don't owe you anything, I said. You forfeited the right to my respect, my help, my concern, when you sent me that text message about Serafina's shopping trip while I was lying in a hospital bed wondering if I was going to die. That was your choice. You chose shopping over your daughter's life. You made that decision. Now live with it. Eleanor, wait, please just listen. I hung up, blocked the number, sat with the finality of it. Jackson found me on the porch an hour later, staring at the mountains. They called, he said. It wasn't a question. They need money for lawyers. What did you tell them? I told them no. I told them they made their choices and now they get to live with the consequences. He sat beside me on the bench. How do you feel? Free, I said, lighter, like I finally cut a rope that was dragging me under. No regrets? I thought about it honestly. No. They weren't sorry they hurt me. They were sorry they got caught. They weren't calling because they missed me or loved me or wanted to make amends. They called because they needed money. That's all I've ever been to them. A resource to exploit when convenient. Winter came early that year. Snow blanketed the cabin and the mountains in white, transforming everything into a landscape from a storybook. Jackson and I spent evenings by the fire, reading and talking and simply existing together. I finished my master's coursework, completed my thesis remotely, graduated with honors without any family present to witness it. Jackson's parents sent flowers and called to congratulate me. They had never met me in person, but they treated me like I mattered. 6 months after we moved, another letter arrived. This time from my father, handwritten on notebook paper, clearly written in desperation. Eleanor, I don't know if you'll read this, but I hope you will. Your mother and I are facing trial. The lawyers say we'll likely be convicted. We're looking at prison time, possibly years. We've lost everything. The house, the businesses, our savings, our reputation. Everyone we knew has turned their backs on us. Serafina won't speak to us. She blames us for ruining her life, even though we were trying to help her. We have no one left. You're all we have. Please, Eleanor, I'm begging you as your father. We need help. We need support, financial and emotional. We need you to testify on our behalf, to tell the court we're good people who made mistakes. We need you to help us through this. I know we weren't perfect parents. I know we focused a lot on Serafina. But we did our best. We gave you a good childhood, a safe home, an education. We loved you, even if we didn't always show it the way you needed. Please don't abandon us when we need you most. You've always been the strong one, the responsible one. Please be that now. Help your family. We're sorry. We're truly, deeply sorry. Please give us a chance to make this right. Love, Dad. I read the letter 3 times, looked for any acknowledgement of specific ways they had failed me. Any real apology that didn't immediately pivot to asking for something. Any recognition that their actions had consequences beyond how it affected them. There was nothing. Just manipulation disguised as vulnerability. Just demands wrapped in desperation. Just the same pattern that had defined our relationship for my entire life. They needed something and I was expected to provide it. I folded the letter carefully and put it in a drawer I never opened. That evening, Jackson asked if I wanted to talk about it. There's nothing to talk about, I said. They're still the same people. They just have fewer options now. Do you feel guilty? For not helping them? I considered the question honestly. No, I didn't create this situation. I didn't force them to commit fraud. I didn't make them use Serafina's identity illegally. I didn't tell them to ignore me for 26 years and then expect me to save them when they needed rescuing. They built this. They get to live in it. Even if they go to prison? Even then, they broke laws. Real laws that hurt real people. The money they didn't pay in taxes, that affects schools and roads and services. The fraud they committed, that victimized clients and customers who trusted them. They don't get a pass because they're my parents. If anything, they should be held to a higher standard. Spring came, bringing wildflowers and new growth. The cabin's garden, neglected for years, started showing signs of life. Jackson and I cleared the weeds, planted vegetables and herbs, built a greenhouse from recycled materials. I started taking on freelance consulting work with nonprofits across the country, helping them with grant writing and program development. The work was fulfilling in ways my previous jobs had never been. Jackson proposed on a morning that started ordinary. We were drinking coffee on the porch, watching sunrise paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink. He didn't have a ring, didn't get down on one knee, didn't make a big production of it. He just looked at me and said, "Marry me." I almost laughed at the simplicity of it. That's your proposal? I don't need grand gestures or perfect moments. I just need you, every day, for the rest of my life. Marry me, Eleanor. Build this life with me officially. Be my family. Be my family. Not join his family. Not become part of something. Be family. Create it together. Yes, I said. Absolutely yes. We planned a small wedding. Just us, Jackson's parents and sisters, a few friends we had made in town, and Mrs. Chen from the grocery store, who had adopted us as unofficial grandchildren. No one from my biological family was invited. No one from my biological family knew it was happening. The ceremony took place in our garden, surrounded by the vegetables and flowers we had planted together. Jackson's father officiated, having gotten ordained online specifically for this purpose. His mother cried through the entire ceremony. His sisters made ridiculous but heartfelt toasts at the small reception we hosted in our cabin. It was perfect. Simple and intimate and full of real love from people who had chosen to be there, who wanted to celebrate us, who saw our worth without needing proof. We posted a few photos on social media, not thinking much of it, just documenting a happy day. 2 days later, the message came. From a number I didn't recognize, but the tone was unmistakable. My mother. We saw your wedding photos. Someone from the town shared them and they ended up on our feed. You looked beautiful. We weren't invited. We're your parents, Eleanor. How could you get married without telling us? Without including us? After everything we've been through, everything we're facing, you owe us at least that. We're family. This is cruel. I read it twice. Then I showed it to Jackson. They still don't get it, he said. No, I agreed. They don't. I blocked the number. Turned off my phone, pulled my husband close and chose, actively and deliberately, to prioritize my peace over their expectations. The trial happened in early summer. I didn't attend, didn't follow the proceedings closely. I saw the headline when the verdict came in. Couple convicted on multiple counts of fraud, face years in prison. Richard and Vivian Vance were each sentenced to 6 years in federal prison. Their assets were seized to pay restitution. They would be in their late 60s when they were released, with criminal records that would follow them forever. Serafina, cleared of all charges, had returned to Europe and was slowly rebuilding her career. She started a blog about recovering from family trauma and identity theft, turning her experience into something meaningful. She never reached out to me, and I didn't reach out to her. We were strangers who happened to share DNA, nothing more. A year after the trial, my mother tried one more time. A letter from prison, forwarded through the law office that had handled Mrs. Shaw's estate. Eleanor, I've had a lot of time to think in here. Time to reflect on our relationship, on the choices your father and I made, on the way we treated you. I want you to know that I understand now. I understand that we failed you. We were so focused on Serafina, so caught up in her needs and her dreams, that we neglected yours. We took you for granted because you were strong and independent and didn't seem to need us. But you did need us, and we weren't there. I'm sorry. Truly, deeply sorry. I know this letter doesn't change anything. I know I can't undo 26 years of neglect with words on paper. But I want you to know that I see it now. I see how we hurt you, how we made you feel invisible and unimportant. You deserved better. You deserved parents who celebrated you, who supported you, who showed up for you. I hope you've found happiness. I hope you've built a life that makes you feel valued and loved. You always deserved that, even though we failed to provide it. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect a response. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand what we lost. We lost you, and that's the biggest punishment of all. Love, Mom. It was the closest thing to a real apology I had ever received from her. An acknowledgement of specific failures, without immediate requests for help or forgiveness. Just recognition of the truth. I read it once, folded it carefully, put it in the drawer with the other letter. Jackson asked if I was going to respond. I don't know, I said honestly. Part of me wants to. Wants to believe this is real, that she actually understands. But another part knows that understanding doesn't undo the damage, doesn't erase the years of neglect. Doesn't change the fact that it took losing everything for her to see what she had. You don't have to decide right now, Jackson said. You don't have to decide ever, really. You get to choose what feels right for you. I thought about it for weeks, drafted responses in my head, imagined conversations we might have, considered what reconciliation might look like. In the end, I wrote one letter back. Short, honest, and clear. Mom, I received your letter. I appreciate the acknowledgement, though it comes decades too late. You say you understand now what you lost. But here's what I need you to understand. You didn't lose me in prison. You lost me every time you chose Serafina over me. You lost me every time you forgot my birthday, missed my achievements, ignored my pain. You lost me when you sent that text message about shopping while I was in the hospital. The prison sentence didn't take me from you. Your choices did. I've built a life now. A good life, with people who choose me, who see me, who value me without needing a crisis to remember I exist. I'm happy, probably for the first time ever. And that happiness doesn't have room for people who only appreciate me after they've lost everything else. I hope you find peace in your remaining years. I hope you use this time to become someone better than who you were. But I won't be part of that journey. I've spent enough of my life trying to earn love from people who wouldn't give it freely. I'm done. This is goodbye. Eleanor. I sent it, felt the weight of finality settle over me. It wasn't angry or bitter. It was just true. 2 years into our marriage, Jackson and I stood on the porch of our cabin, watching another sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. My master's degree was framed and hanging in our home office. My nonprofit consulting business was thriving. We had a garden that actually produced food. We had friends in town who invited us to dinner and game nights. We had a life that was genuinely, truly ours. Do you ever regret it? Jackson asked, cutting them off completely, not being there for them. I thought about the questions seriously. Sometimes I wonder what might have happened if I had handled things differently, if I had tried to maintain some kind of relationship, even after everything. But then I remember how I felt for 26 years, how small I made myself, how much I sacrificed for people who never valued the sacrifice. And I remember that I'm not responsible for saving people who spent years making me feel like I wasn't worth saving. That's fair, Jackson said. They didn't destroy me by being terrible parents, I continued. They freed me. They showed me exactly who they were, over and over again, until I finally believed them. And in doing that, they taught me the most valuable lesson I've ever learned, that I am worth more than the bare minimum, that I deserve love that doesn't require me to earn it, that I'm allowed to walk away from people who hurt me, even if they're family. Especially if they're family, Jackson added. Especially then. We stood there in comfortable silence, his arm around my waist, my head on his shoulder, and I felt something I had spent my entire life searching for. Peace. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of genuine contentment. The knowledge that I had chosen myself, protected myself, valued myself when no one else would. I didn't get revenge on my parents. I didn't destroy them out of spite or anger or vindictiveness. I simply made sure the truth came to light. Made sure someone held them accountable for actions that harmed others. Made sure Serafina, who was as much a victim as anyone, had the information she needed to protect herself. And then I walked away. Built a life they could never touch, with people they would never meet, in a place they would never visit. That wasn't revenge. That was freedom. So here's what I learned through all of this. You cannot earn love from people who don't value you. You cannot sacrifice enough, give enough, hurt enough to make someone care who has decided you don't matter. And trying to do so will only destroy you. The people who are meant to love you will show up without being asked. They will prioritize you without needing a reminder. They will see your value without requiring proof. And when you finally walk away from the people who only remember you exist when they need something, you're not being cruel. You're being honest. You're setting a boundary that says, I am worth more than this. My parents didn't destroy me by neglecting me. They freed me. They showed me exactly who they were, and I finally believed them. And in doing so, I learned to value myself enough to walk away from people who never would. I didn't get revenge. I got justice. And more importantly, I got peace. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening to my story. I know it's long, and it's heavy, and maybe it hit close to home for some of you. If you've ever been the forgotten child, the used friend, the convenient partner, I hope my story gives you permission to choose yourself, to set boundaries, to walk away from people who only love you when it's convenient. Have you ever had to cut off family members who were toxic? Have you ever been the scapegoat while someone else was the golden child? How did you find the courage to leave? Drop your stories in the comments. I read every single one, and your experiences matter. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who's still trying to earn love from people who will never give it freely. Someone who needs permission to choose themselves. And here's the question I want you to think about. If the people in your life only remember you exist when they need something, are they really in your life at all? Or are you just a resource they're exploiting? Thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. And remember, you are worthy of love that doesn't require you to shrink yourself to receive it. Take care of yourselves out there. And don't forget to subscribe.